This is my true story. I trusted my son with everything I had, my money, my accounts, my future. He said he wanted to help, that I shouldn't worry about bills or banking anymore. I thought it was kindness. It wasn't. 2 days later, the bank called me and said my account was empty, my credit destroyed, and my name listed as bankrupt. My own son had done it, the boy I once carried in my arms. But I wasn't done yet. What I did next turned his comfort into dust. Before that, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe so my story can reach more people. It started simple. He came to my house one Sunday morning, smiling like a good son. He brought breakfast, sat beside me, and said I shouldn't worry about my banking anymore. He said times had changed. Everything was online now, complicated, unsafe for someone my age. He said, "Dad, let me handle your accounts. You just relax." I believed him. I always did. He was my only son, the one I worked for, the one I sacrificed for. I had built everything with my own 2 hands, from factory shifts to late-night repairs. I never took a vacation, never wasted a dollar. Every bit of my savings, every penny in the account came from sweat and patience. When he offered help, I felt relief. I thought maybe this was what growing old was supposed to be, letting the next generation take over. I had spent a lifetime being responsible. Now I thought I could finally rest, knowing my future was safe with my own blood. He brought papers, bank passwords, and forms that looked complicated. He said I just had to sign them. I didn't read much. I trusted him. I thought he was simplifying my life, not stealing it. I handed him my bank cards, my PINs, my logins. I even thanked him. He smiled, hugged me, and said I wouldn't have to stand in line at the bank anymore. That sounded good to me. My knees hurt these days. I told him how proud I was that he was becoming responsible. He laughed and said he'd take care of everything. That night, I slept better than I had in years. I told myself I had done the right thing. I had given control to the one person who cared about me most. I dreamed of peace. I didn't know that while I slept, my name was being written into the wrong kind of system, one that didn't care about blood, only balance. The next day, he came again with a laptop. He said he'd set up automatic payments, simplified investments, made sure my pension deposits went directly into secured accounts. I nodded, grateful. He spoke with confidence, typing fast, using terms I didn't understand. I smiled proudly, thinking, he's smarter than I ever was. He left that afternoon with a pat on my shoulder and said, "Don't worry about a thing." And I didn't. I sat in my chair, watched the sunset, and thought about how lucky I was to have a son who cared enough to take responsibility. But looking back, I realized something. The moment you stop paying attention to your own money, you stop owning it. I had handed him not just my bank accounts, but my independence. And he knew it. Within 48 hours, the peace I felt began to feel strange. My phone rang more than usual. The bank sent notifications I didn't understand. I ignored them at first. I thought they were system updates or policy changes. But something inside me, that old worker's instinct, told me something wasn't right. I tried calling him that night, but he didn't answer. I told myself he must be busy. He always was. But deep down, I felt something breaking. The same hands that once reached for mine as a child were now typing away at everything I had built. He didn't steal it in anger. He did it quietly, with smiles, with gentle words. That's how betrayal works, not with shouting, but with calm voices and signatures written in trust. By the time I realized what had happened, my name meant nothing to the bank, my savings were gone, and the system called me a debtor. I wasn't just an old man anymore. I was a man stripped of value by the very person I had raised. The promise of help became the beginning of my downfall. And the worst part was, he didn't even think he had done anything wrong. It didn't take long. 2 days after he said he'd handle my accounts, the first signs appeared. Small withdrawals at first. Grocery stores, fuel stations, a few digital payments. Nothing alarming. Then came the larger ones. Thousands gone in a single day. Transfers I never made, to names I didn't know. The numbers on my screen kept shrinking while my confusion grew. I went to the bank the next morning. I carried my old passbook, my ID, and a quiet fear in my chest. The young teller looked at me with the same polite smile she gave everyone. But when she pulled up my account, the smile faded. She called the manager. He came out, serious and slow, like a man preparing to deliver bad news. He asked me if I had authorized the transfers. I said no. He turned the monitor toward me, showing my own signature on digital forms, my own name approving every transaction. He said all the activity was done from my registered number and verified devices. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Every record pointed back to me. But it wasn't me. I walked out with papers in my hand and shame in my heart. The world outside looked the same, but I wasn't. For the first time in my life, I felt like a fool. Not because I lost money, but because I had trusted the wrong person. When I reached home, I opened my drawer. My debit cards were missing. My checkbook, too. I looked through my files and found unfamiliar documents, credit applications, online approvals, digital authorizations. All with my name. My son hadn't stolen my money overnight. He had been preparing for weeks, maybe months. The next day, the phone rang again. The bank said there were new withdrawals pending, but my account was empty. They said I had no funds, no credit, no insurance. They told me, gently but firmly, that I was bankrupt. That word felt heavy. I had worked my entire life so that word would never belong to me. I sat down at my table, the one where I used to count coins when my wife was alive. The same table where I helped my son with his first homework, where we celebrated his first job. Now it held papers with red stamps and numbers I didn't recognize. I stared at them for hours, tracing the path of every missing dollar until my eyes burned. He didn't steal it with force. He stole it with calmness. That's what hurt the most. There was no confrontation, no argument, no shouting. Just quiet betrayal, wrapped in words like help and care. Neighbors came by that evening. They asked how I was. I smiled and said nothing. Shame is a private weight. It doesn't need witnesses. I spent that night awake, watching the clock tick past midnight. Every sound in the house felt loud. The hum of the fridge, the creak of the fan, the slow collapse of trust. He didn't call. He didn't check in. I checked his social media instead. Photos of dinners, new clothes, smiles. I scrolled through them, numb. Each picture was another piece of proof. My money dressed as his happiness. For a moment, I felt pity. Maybe he was lost. Maybe he didn't understand the damage he had done. But then I remembered how careful those transfers were, how clean the signatures looked. That wasn't a mistake. That was precision. By the next morning, I decided something. I would stop feeling sorry. I had lived long enough to know that when people think they've buried you, you can still dig your way out if you keep your mind clear. He had stolen my savings. He had taken my comfort. But he had underestimated something. I was the one who built that comfort from nothing. I had lost money before and rebuilt it. I had lost people and survived it. This wouldn't end with me broken. He thought I was finished. But I was just getting started. When I went back to the bank, I thought maybe someone would understand. Maybe someone would believe me. I stood in line like any other customer, holding the folder that carried my life savings reduced to meaningless papers. My legs hurt, my chest felt heavy, but I waited quietly. I didn't want pity. I just wanted answers. When my turn came, I walked to the counter. The young teller looked at my ID and typed my name into her computer. Her face changed. She leaned closer and whispered, "Your account is frozen." Her voice dropped lower, almost like she was announcing a death. People behind me started to look. I could feel their eyes on my back. Some probably thought I was a criminal. Others just pitied the old man who didn't understand modern banking. My throat tightened. I asked what happened. She told me she couldn't share details, that I needed to speak with the branch manager. I waited again, sitting on a plastic chair, the same chair where I once waited proudly to open my first savings account decades ago. Back then, I was young, confident, full of hope. Today, I was old, tired, and stripped of everything. The manager came out and invited me to his office. He spoke softly, carefully. He said there were reports of fraudulent activity on my account, but since all transactions were self-authorized, there was nothing they could reverse. He handed me a statement, a list of withdrawals, loans, charges. My name was there, my signature too. But I hadn't touched a thing. I asked if he could check who accessed my online account. He said it was against policy. He said the device was registered under my number, so technically, I was responsible. I told him it wasn't me. He nodded but didn't care. To him, I was just another old man who didn't understand what he had signed. When I walked out, everyone looked at me differently. Even the guards who used to greet me stayed silent. My hands were shaking, not because of age, but because of humiliation. I had worked 40 years to build that account. Every deposit a memory, every dollar earned with dignity. Now the same bank that once called me valued customer was treating me like a burden. I walked home slowly. Each step felt heavier. My shoes scraped against the pavement, echoing like reminders of failure. I passed the bakery where I used to buy bread for my son when he was little. I passed the corner store where I once stood proud, paying bills on time. Everything I passed looked the same, but nothing felt the same anymore. When I reached home, I sat by the table again. I looked at the letter the bank gave me. Account frozen, pending review. The words looked sharp, cold, final. I placed it next to my family photo. My wife's smile stared back from the frame. She would have known what to do. She always did. I thought about calling my son, asking him why, demanding an explanation. But I stopped myself. I didn't need to hear lies. I already knew the truth. The man who promised to protect my money had taken it all. The boy I once fed was now feeding off my name. The next morning, I didn't go to the bank again. I couldn't bear the looks, the whispers, the quiet pity. But I promised myself something. I wouldn't die a fool. I may have lost what they could see, but not what they couldn't. I still had my mind, my records, my patience. I folded the papers neatly and placed them back in the folder. The shame burned, but under it, something colder started to grow. Determination. They thought they had buried me under humiliation. But they forgot one thing. I had survived worse. I had rebuilt from nothing before, and I could do it again. That evening, I closed the door, locked it, and sat alone at my table. The world thought I was finished. The bank thought I was bankrupt. My son thought he had won. But I wasn't done. I knew somewhere, in the middle of all those years of work, I had left behind pieces of myself, papers, deeds, accounts he didn't know existed. I was old, not foolish. And if my son could take everything from me, I could take everything back. I opened my old wooden cabinet. Inside were boxes I hadn't touched in decades. Dust rose into the air as I pulled out folders, envelopes, and ledgers yellowed by time. They smelled of ink, sweat, and memory. Each page carried a story. Loans I gave, bonds I purchased, deposits I made under my small business name back when everything was written by hand. As I flipped through them, I realized what my son had missed. He had stolen what was visible, the accounts that existed under my regular name. But the business accounts, the old joint holdings I'd created under my initials, the dormant investments from years ago, they were still untouched. Forgotten by time, but not by me. I took a notebook and started writing everything down. Account numbers, dates, banks, lawyers, contact names. My handwriting shook, but my memory didn't. Every detail came back. Who signed what, where I stored things, what belonged to which account. I spent the entire night going through those papers, building a map of the past that led to my future. By morning, I had found proof that my wealth wasn't gone. It was hidden, just waiting to be remembered. He had stolen everything in sight, but what he couldn't see was what I had buried long ago in smart decisions and forgotten records. He thought he was clever. But I had built my life in an age where nothing existed online, where things were real, physical, and traceable by memory, not passwords. I called an old lawyer I used to work with, a man who had handled my company filings 30 years ago. His voice cracked with surprise when he heard mine. I told him what happened, and he agreed to meet. I packed all my papers in a worn briefcase and left quietly. At his office, he went through the files one by one, scanning, checking, calculating. Then he looked at me and said something I'll never forget. "They took your money, but not your foundation. You still own more than they think." Those words hit hard. I wasn't poor. I was patient. He helped me reopen dormant accounts, verify ownerships, and transfer control of everything back into my hands. It would take time, he said. But it was possible. Every signature, every record, every forgotten investment became a small victory. I could almost feel the shame lifting from my shoulders. By the time I returned home that evening, I was exhausted but calmer. I had proof now. Proof that I wasn't finished. Proof that I still mattered. I looked at the photo of my son on the shelf. He smiled in it, young, happy, before greed took over. I stared at it for a while. Then I placed it face down. I didn't want to see that smile anymore. Not until he knew what it felt like to lose everything he thought he owned. The next morning, I made myself a cup of tea, opened the window, and watched the sunrise. The sky looked the same, but I felt different. The world still thought I was bankrupt, but I knew the truth. He had stolen what was easy. I was about to reclaim what was mine. Quietly, patiently, and legally. Sometimes revenge doesn't start with anger. It starts with paperwork. That night, I couldn't sleep. The fan above me made a soft humming sound, but my mind was louder. Every word he had said in the past few weeks came back to me like echoes. "Don't worry, Dad. We'll handle it. You've done enough. Just rest." I replayed them one by one, and each one felt like a knife disguised as comfort. I sat up on the bed and stared at the ceiling. How many times had I trusted him blindly? How many chances had I given him, believing he was still the boy I raised, not the man who had learned to lie with a smile? He hadn't wanted to protect me. He had wanted to replace me, to erase me from my own life. That was the truth I hadn't wanted to see. He didn't just take my money. He took my name, my identity, and my independence. And for what? For comfort he didn't earn. For power he didn't deserve. I walked to the window. The street outside was empty, quiet, except for the sound of a distant dog barking. The air felt heavy. I could see the faint reflection of myself in the glass. An old man, tired but not broken. I realized something then. He had stolen my wealth, but not my will. I went back to the table and opened my files again. I looked at every signature, every document I had ever signed for him. School fees, car loans, house registrations. Each one had my name beside his. He had built his life standing on my shoulders, and now he had tried to bury me under them. I picked up an old photograph, me, him, and his mother. She was holding his hand. I remember that day. We had gone to open his first savings account. He was just a boy, excited, full of dreams. She had looked at me and said, "He'll grow up to be strong." I smiled then. Now I just stared at the photo and whispered under my breath, "You were wrong." The phone buzzed. It was the bank again. Another message. "Loan payment overdue." I almost laughed. A man who had never missed a bill in 40 years was now being reminded like a thief. But instead of anger, something else settled inside me. Clarity. He thought I was finished. He thought the word bankrupt meant I had no strength left. But he forgot who taught him everything he knows about survival. He forgot where he came from. I stood up and walked to the mirror. My reflection looked old, yes. Lines on the face, gray hair, tired eyes. But behind all that, I saw the man who built from nothing. The one who walked miles to work every day, who saved every coin, who made sure his son never went to bed hungry. That man was still here. And that night, I promised myself something. I would take back everything. Not through anger, not through shouting, but through patience. The kind only age can teach. I would make every system, every rule, every forgotten record work for me again. He thought he had buried me with technology, but I had built my life in a world without it. I could rebuild without it too. I closed the files, turned off the light, and sat back on the bed. The anger was gone. It had burned out, leaving behind something colder. Focus. He had betrayed me, but I wouldn't die with that stain on my name. I had lived too long, worked too hard, and lost too much to let a foolish son end my story. That night, I stopped being a victim. I stopped being the helpless old man the world thought I was. I became what I used to be, a builder. And builders don't beg for what's theirs. They reclaim it, piece by piece. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. The world outside was quiet, but my mind was already working. I made tea, dressed neatly, and packed every file I had organized the night before. The papers were heavy in my bag, but the weight felt right. That bag no longer carried loss. It carried proof. I went to the same lawyer who had helped me decades ago when I first opened my small business. He was older now, too, gray-haired, slower, but still sharp. When I walked into his office, he stood up in surprise. I told him everything, how my son had taken my banking, drained my accounts, and left me declared bankrupt. He listened carefully without interrupting, eyes steady, hands folded. When I finished, he said one line that changed everything. "Let's see what's still yours." We spent the next several hours going through my records. He opened files, cross-checked account numbers, verified signatures, and pulled up property databases. Every time he clicked, a part of my history returned to life. Old savings bonds, investment certificates, forgotten joint deposits, even rental deeds under my business name from years ago. My son had stolen the visible money, but not the hidden roots of it. By afternoon, the lawyer looked at me and smiled faintly. "You were smarter than you thought," he said. "You left yourself a back door." I had forgotten about many of those accounts, but they were still legally active, still under my control. With one stroke of his pen, he transferred full authority back to me. The assets that once sat silent were now awake again, and they belonged only to me. But I didn't stop there. I asked him to file a fraud report against my son and his wife. We gathered every document, screenshots, withdrawals, messages, proof of unauthorized transactions. I signed each page slowly, carefully, without emotion. The police would take time, but the bank would move faster. By evening, the lawyer called the bank's legal department. I sat beside him as he explained the situation, that the withdrawals had been done under manipulation, that my consent had been forged, that digital authorization was obtained through coercion. The tone of the man on the other end changed immediately. What was once irreversible became under review. What was customer error became pending investigation. When we hung up, the lawyer leaned back and said, "They'll freeze everything for now." I nodded. That was all I needed. I left his office as the sun was setting. The streets were glowing orange, and people rushed home from work. I walked slowly, breathing in the cool air. My steps felt different, heavier in body, but lighter in spirit. I had been called bankrupt that week, but now, my son's freedom with my money was ending. By the time I reached home, my phone buzzed. It was a message from the bank. Account activity restricted. Investigation in progress. I smiled for the first time in days. The game had turned. I made dinner quietly, ate in peace, and watched the small light flicker from the oil lamp near the window. My house was simple, but it was mine. My money might still be tangled in systems, but control had returned where it belonged, to me. Later that night, I sat back in my chair, reading the last letter I had written to my son before all this happened. The one where I thanked him for taking care of me. I tore it in half and threw it into the trash. I didn't need words anymore. I had action. He had taken my trust and turned it into theft. I had taken his theft and turned it into a case file. By tomorrow, he would learn that the same hands he tricked had the power to sign him out of comfort. He wanted to handle my banking. Now, I was handling his future. The next few days felt strange. My phone didn't stop ringing. Everyone who once ignored me suddenly wanted to talk. My daughter-in-law called first. Her voice was loud and panicked. She said their cards weren't working, the bank had frozen everything, and they couldn't pay their bills. She kept saying it was my fault, that I had ruined them. I listened until she ran out of words, then I quietly ended the call. I didn't owe her explanations. By afternoon, I heard the neighbors whispering through my window. They loved stories like this, an old man and a family scandal. I could almost hear their sentences. The son was handling the money. The father found out. The police got involved. I didn't care. Let them talk. Truth doesn't beg for attention. It stands still while lies destroy themselves. That evening, his car stopped outside my house. The engine roared, then went silent. He slammed the door, walked fast up the path, and started banging on my door like a man trying to wake the dead. I didn't rush. I let him knock. Let him feel the same waiting he made me feel when I used to call and he never answered. When I finally opened the door, he stood there sweating, eyes red, voice shaking between anger and fear. He demanded to know what I had done. He said the bank froze every account, that they were being investigated, that people were asking questions. I looked at him and said nothing. He shouted louder, desperate for a reaction. I walked past him, made 2 cups of tea, and set one on the table. I didn't offer a single word. He sat down eventually, his voice breaking. He said his wife had taken their child to her mother's house. His business partners had left. His friends stopped returning his calls. His reputation was gone. Everything he built using my money had turned to dust. He kept talking, his pride collapsing with every sentence. I didn't interrupt. I let silence answer for me. He said he didn't mean to hurt me, that he only wanted to manage things better. But lies sound weak when they come from a man who has already been caught. He looked smaller now, not by height, but by truth. The same son who once spoke to me like a boss now couldn't meet my eyes. When he finally stood up, I could tell he wanted forgiveness. But I wasn't ready to give it. Forgiveness without change is just another lie. I told him to leave quietly. He didn't argue. He walked to the door, stopped for a second as if waiting for me to say something, then left without looking back. After he was gone, I sat with my tea and looked around my small home. The walls were still standing, the roof still held. Everything I truly needed was still mine. But his world, the one he built with greed and arrogance, was falling apart piece by piece. In the following weeks, the bank finished their investigation. His accounts stayed frozen. His company lost its license. His car was repossessed. His wife filed for separation. He went from living in luxury to sleeping in a rented room. Every newspaper headline he once admired now reminded him of his own downfall. I didn't speak to him. I didn't need to. He was learning the lesson life gives to people who mistake kindness for weakness. The same hands he robbed had quietly taken back everything. The same man he called old and useless had outsmarted him without raising his voice. Sometimes at night, I see him walking down my street. He doesn't knock anymore. He just looks at the house from a distance, maybe wondering how it feels to have peace he can't buy. I don't wave. I don't invite him in. I let the silence between us speak for what words can't fix. He called it betrayal. I called it balance. He called it revenge. I called it consequence. And in the end, he learned the truth. When you steal from a man who built everything by hand, you're not just taking his money, you're building your own collapse. It didn't take long for the court papers to arrive. Thick envelopes stamped with government seals, filled with the same kind of authority my son used to think he owned. I opened them slowly, sitting at the same table where I had once signed over my banking to him. This time, the papers worked in my favor. Every clause, every signature, every line of ownership was turning against him. The investigation had uncovered everything: the unauthorized transfers, the forged approvals, the manipulated authorizations. The bank records were clear. He had used my credentials to drain my accounts. And now, the law had stepped in. I sat in the courtroom quietly when the hearing began. He was there too, standing beside his lawyer, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. His eyes met mine once, but only for a second. There was no pride left, no power, no fake smile. Just fear. The same fear I once felt when I stood at that bank counter being called bankrupt. The judge asked questions. The evidence spoke louder than either of us could. My lawyer presented every document, every statement, every signature. The story was simple. An old man trusted his son, and the son betrayed that trust. But what made the difference was proof. The paper trail didn't lie. By the time the verdict was read, I didn't even need to hear the words. I already knew. His accounts were seized, his credit lines canceled, his personal assets frozen. The same system that once believed him now turned against him. Justice wasn't loud. It was steady, clean, final. When we walked out of the courtroom, he tried to follow me. He said my name softly, but I kept walking. I didn't want to hear his excuses anymore. Forgiveness doesn't mean going back. It means closing the door and leaving it locked. That night, I sat on my porch and looked at the sky. The stars were bright, and for the first time in months, I felt light. The shame that once weighed on my shoulders was gone. The word bankrupt no longer belonged to me. It belonged to the one who had earned it through greed. Over the next few weeks, the results of the reversal unfolded quietly. Every property he owned had been purchased with my guarantees, loans I had co-signed years ago. The court gave me the right to revoke them all. And I did. One by one, every safety net he had built using my name disappeared. His house, his car, his business, all gone. He learned that day that the man he called old and useless still remembered every paper he'd ever signed. Every clause, every condition, every hidden protection I'd written decades ago now stood between him and comfort. He had handled my banking. Now I was handling his life. He came to see me once more, standing outside the gate in the rain. He didn't shout this time. He didn't argue. He just stood there, wet and quiet, holding something in his hands. My old bank card, the one he had used. He placed it on the step and walked away without a word. I didn't pick it up. I let the rain wash it into the gutter where it belonged. By the time the year ended, the court declared me financially restored. My name was cleared, my savings rebuilt through the accounts he never found. The word bankrupt was removed from every record, but for him, the damage stayed. The banks flagged his name. The investors avoided him. His reputation never recovered. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. Revenge wasn't my goal. Peace was. And peace came the moment I realized I didn't have to destroy him to win. All I had to do was stop saving him. He took my money and made me poor. I took his comfort and made him humble. That was the reversal, not of wealth, but of power. After everything ended, I decided to disappear from the noise. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I packed 2 bags, closed the door behind me, and walked away from the house that held too many memories of betrayal. I took a train to a small coastal town, quiet, simple, far from banks, lawyers, and family drama. The air smelled of salt instead of paperwork. For the first time in a long time, I could breathe without thinking of numbers. I found a small house near the shore, 1 bedroom, a wooden porch, and a garden that hadn't been touched in years. I paid the rent in cash and asked for nothing else. The landlord didn't ask questions. He just handed me the keys. I liked that. No curiosity, no pity, just peace. My mornings became simple. I woke up with the sun, made tea, and listened to the waves crash against the rocks. I read the newspaper slowly, not to check markets or bank rates, but to remember that the world kept moving even when you stopped chasing it. I started planting tomatoes and herbs in the back garden. The soil was rough, but it felt good to work with my hands again. It reminded me of who I was before money, before greed, before disappointment. I didn't think about my son much. Some days I did. Most days I didn't. The anger was gone, replaced by something quieter. Distance. I had stopped hating him the same day the court gave its verdict. Hate ties you to the person who wronged you. Letting go unties the rope. I chose freedom over fury. Every month my pension deposits came in. I checked them myself, always in person. I signed every paper, counted every coin, balanced every statement. I didn't trust anyone else to touch my accounts again. It wasn't paranoia, it was experience. Trust isn't given, it's earned, and once it's broken, it doesn't grow back the same. Sometimes people from the town would stop by to talk. A shopkeeper, a fisherman, a teacher. They didn't know my story, and I didn't tell it. To them, I was just another quiet old man who lived by the sea. I liked that. I didn't need to be known anymore. Being forgotten was safer. I cooked simple meals, cleaned my own house, and paid every bill on time. Each small task felt like taking back ownership of my life, something I had handed away too easily before. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the dignity of control. Once in a while I would walk to the post office to collect letters. Most were advertisements, some were pension updates. Then one day, I got a letter with no return address. Inside was a single note, just 5 words written in my son's handwriting. "I'm sorry. I lost everything." I read it once. Then I folded it neatly and placed it inside my drawer. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just sat quietly. He had finally learned what I already knew. That when you take what isn't yours, you lose what can never be replaced. I didn't reply. Not out of cruelty, but because some lessons have to settle in silence. My life now is small, but it's mine. My money is safe. My peace is constant. My days are simple and honest. I don't need luxury. I don't need recognition. I have stability, something even the richest people in the world never find after betrayal. In the evenings, I sit on the porch and feed breadcrumbs to the pigeons. The sea glows orange under the setting sun, and I think to myself, maybe this is what true wealth looks like. Not gold, not numbers, just calmness earned after chaos. The world once called me bankrupt. Now I call myself free. He said, "We'll handle your banking now." I said nothing. I thought it was love. I thought it was care. But now I know it was greed wearing kindness like a mask. 2 days later, the bank called me bankrupt. That word followed me like a shadow, but it never belonged to me. It belonged to him. He took my money, my dignity, and my name, thinking age had made me blind. But I saw everything. I just waited for the right time to open my eyes. He used my trust like a password, logged into my life, and changed everything I built. But when he pressed those buttons, he didn't just empty my accounts, he emptied himself. He lost what every thief loses in the end: peace. Now I live far from that noise. My mornings are quiet, my balance sheets are clean, my name is clear again. I wake up with the sea breeze, drink my tea in silence, and count only what truly matters: the hours of peace, not the money in the bank. I balance my own checkbook, not because I have to, but because it reminds me that control is a kind of dignity. People ask me if I miss him. I don't. I remember him. There's a difference. Missing means you still expect something. Remembering means you've learned enough to stop expecting. I don't wish him harm. I wish him awareness. One day, he'll understand what I did. That when you steal from someone who raised you, you don't just lose their money, you lose their respect, and that costs more than anything a bank can hold. Sometimes I see parents handing their finances to their children, proud and trusting. I want to tell them, keep at least one account in your own name. But I stay quiet. People only understand lessons when life teaches them. He tried to take control of my life. Now, he has none over his own. He calls sometimes, but I let it ring. I'm done explaining the difference between forgiveness and foolishness. Forgiveness is peace. Foolishness is reopening the same wound twice. I chose peace. My home is small, but it's mine. My meals are simple, but they taste better when paid for by honest hands. I walk by the shore every evening and feed the birds that land near my porch. They come and go freely, never taking more than they need. People could learn something from birds. Every time I look at my reflection, I see wrinkles, lines, and years. But behind them, I see something else. Strength. The kind that comes from standing up after being pushed down. The kind that doesn't need applause or revenge to feel complete. He once made me feel like I had nothing left. Now, I realize I have everything I ever needed: freedom, clarity, and self-respect. I don't measure my wealth in currency anymore. I measure it in calm mornings and quiet nights. He thought he made me bankrupt, but I'm richer than he'll ever be, because money can return. Character doesn't. Final thought. Never sign away your control. Not your bank, not your name, not your independence. Help your children, but never hand them the keys to your life. One day, they might use them to lock you out. Keep one account only you can touch, because safety isn't about money. It's about knowing that when everyone else fails you, you can still trust yourself.